the lecture will be about the Nymphea birth cohort, but I will basically tell you a story about how we decided to do an internet-based cohort, an internet-based birth cohort. So I will give you a kind of rationale at the beginning on why it is important to do birth cohorts, but then we will discuss why it could be good to do studies over the internet and why we took this decision and what were the consequences of the decision of doing a study over the internet. Okay, so this is the outline, let's say, of the presentation. I start with this slide, which is maybe a bit complex, but it conveys a very important message. And the message is that health status is not something that doesn't change over time, or is not something that goes from being healthy to have a disease, but it's more like a trajectory, a development trajectory. So as you can see here, from birth to older adulthood, this is a line of individual health outcomes. So you can really change your health status over time. And of course, the fact that you can change your health status over time has a lot of consequences. One consequence that we will discuss in a few slides is that you can really intervene at any time during your life course to try to change your trajectory. Of course, what we want to do is to improve the population health trajectories. Okay? So this is this is a diagram that want to say that time really matters. So this is today, when we have the future and the past, from birth to death. And the health of individuals actually changes over time. The determinants, the important determinants change over time. So determinants, we have different determinants of health at birth or when we are adults, of course. Also, the relationship between the determinants and the health may change over time. So something that might be very important at a given point in time maybe is not important any longer at another age. And also the relationship between determinant and health may depend on time. Okay, so as I was saying just now, maybe something that was important then is not important, or becomes more or less important. So time is very important, and the health is actually a trajectory. This is an example of something. You have the health development. We have two different trajectories, and this person, you have your health going up and down. Maybe this could be something related to obesity, for example. Sometimes you might have a very high BMI, then maybe the BMI it goes down, then goes up again, and then there are factors that might improve your trajectory or be risk factors. Like, for example, here we have low social status and high social status and positive parenting. Then positive school environment can change your trajectory, and then obesogenic environment will increase your probability of having obesity, and so on. So this is how we should look at our opportunities to actually improve the life, the health of the people over life. And then this translates into the concept of life course epidemiology that you might have heard. Before, here we have a definition. So it's the study of a long-term biological, behavioral, psychosocial processes that link the adult health and disease risk to physical or social exposures acting earlier in life, for example, during gestation, childhood, adolescence, etc. And this relationship can be explained through different mechanisms, let's say through different conceptual models, which might be all true, or maybe also all wrong, but at least one I hope might be true. That is that we might have critical periods, which means that there are specific windows in life which are very relevant for your health trajectory. So there are periods in which really we have strong opportunities for prevention. Another a conceptual model is the risk accumulation. So we go through different risks over our or prevention factor over our life course, and this will affect our health trajectory or chain of risk. So something that happens now will affect my exposure status in next year, which will affect my exposure status in further along in time when with aging of the person. So these are different conceptual models, and I will now mainly focus, just to give you an example, on the first one, the critical period, because there is one variable that has been studied to a great extent, which is birth weight. It has been studied a lot because when you are born, birth weight is easily recorded. So it's an easily accessible variable, and also has a lot of information about what happened during the fetal life. So these two children have clearly different birth weights, and this may affect their risk of disease, their health trajectory over life. And so the critical period here would be the prenatal period, which is in this case summarized by just one variable, which is just easy to measure, that is birth weight. Okay, and this is very consistent with some hypotheses that were suggested starting from the late 80s, and David Barker was very influential on this kind of hypothesis. He suggested the so-called fetal origins of disease, and was saying, well, exposure alterations in fetal nutrition and endocrine status during fetal life will affect your risk of develop several diseases like metabolic endocrine diseases later in life. So this is kind of, it's not the start, it was not a hypothesis that came out of the blue, but it was very influential in the late 80s, this hypothesis. And in the late 90s, this developed into what can be called the DOHAD, the developmental origin of health and diseases, which is a bit broader. It's saying that things that happen early in life will affect your health during adult life, and also across generations, so for one generation to another. And this concept became quite kind of well known in the public. So I guess Anne-Marie has already shown this earlier, or not? You haven't done it. This is a kind of famous first page of the Time, which title was "How the First 9 Months Shape the Rest of Your Life." So really the concept of critical period. And then here was the new science of fetal origins. So the idea that the fetal origins of diseases. Okay, David Barker and his group showed some initial evidence about the relationship between birth weight and later health in adult life. And this is just an example which is very shows the idea very nicely. This is the birth weight in women and men, and here you can see the mortality, standardized mortality ratio for cardiovascular diseases. And then you can see here that those born with a high birth weight had a lower probability of dying from cardiovascular diseases later in life. So you clearly see a relationship between something happening at birth and your health later on in adult life. This has been shown in several studies. This is a meta-analysis from some years ago, showing that per 1 kilogram increase at birth, you had a risk of dying in adulthood, which was reduced, 6% decreased risk of dying per 1 kilogram of birth weight. And this was particularly true for cardiovascular diseases. You have a 12% decreased risk of dying in adulthood for one increase in weight. 1 kilogram increase in weight. And then for cancer mortality, it goes in the opposite direction. So higher birth weight is associated with a higher cancer mortality. I mean, many of these relationships are not fully understood yet. So we still have to understand what's going on. But definitely there is a relationship. So this is the concept, the context I wanted to give to you. But then what I wanted to talk about is how I got involved to this and why we started the Nymphea cohort, the birth cohort that was put in the title. So I actually did my PhD in Sweden, in Stockholm. And at that time, in the group where that I joined for my PhD, this article was very influential. It was written by Dimitrios Trikopoulos, who was a teacher here at the European Education Program of Epidemiology. And he was titling this hypothesis article, and the title was, "Does breast cancer originate in utero?" So the idea that we have just seen, that birth weight was associated with breast cancer risk in adulthood. And in my case, I started working on another cancer, which was testicular cancer. So the first paper we worked on was perinatal determinants of germ cell testicular cancer, and then it was in relation to histological subtypes. So here again, gestational duration was inversely associated with the risk of testicular cancer, while birth weight was positively associated with the risk of testicular cancer. These studies were based on registries. And so it was kind of easy in the Nordic countries to link the birth registries with the cancer registries and start finding relationships between birth characteristics and later risk of cancer. Again, this was not completely new. There were already some experimental studies in animals showing that if a mother, pregnant mother, were exposed to some carcinogens, then the children had a higher risk of cancer. And these are studies summarized, this paper summarized by Lorenzo Tomatis, who was a former director of the International Agency of Research on Cancer, summarizes the different studies that were available at that time. This is 1992. So there was already evidence there that exposures acting during pregnancy could affect the cancer risk of the offspring. And both in animal studies and in humans. So the problem becomes how to study this relationship when it comes to cancer, but any other disease. In Sweden, Nordic countries, you can link the registries, but the registries have a limited amount of information. And then you can do it only in some specific countries. For example, in Italy, it would be difficult to do, and it was definitely not possible to do it at that time, in the beginning of 2000, because the registries were not old enough in order to do this kind of linkage. And so already at that time, I mean, several years before, actually, there was this possibility available of doing birth cohorts. So birth cohorts means putting together different things. So measure the exposure and the outcome prospectively, having a long-term follow-up, measuring things repeatedly over time, recruiting the participant at birth or during fetal life, and collecting biological samples and biobanking them. It's kind of very complex study design. You need a lot of energy. You need also a lot of patience because you have to wait for the outcome to occur. And you need a really large research infrastructure to set up something like this. It's kind of complex study design. But of course, it was clear that it was important to start birth cohorts in different different populations around the world, and in our case, around Europe and in Italy. And there was even a paper which came out in 2004, written by Anne-Marie, who is here, and other two teachers of the European Education Program in Epidemiology, Manolis Kogevinas and Jörn Olsen, who have already stopped teaching actually in the course, but you might know them, and Jörn Olsen we have already mentioned a few times actually. And the idea was, okay, we need to start different birth cohorts all around Europe. There are already some of them, some very large like in Denmark and in Norway, some older cohorts like in the UK, and we should put them together. We should really create a network of birth cohorts. And they were saying, well, there are several reasons to do that, because there are differences, so you can compare the results over the different populations, because of statistical power, to study rare events, to replicate the findings, and to start a kind of virtual mega cohort. They were saying that. So you put together all the different cohorts. You don't need to put together all the data in the same place, but you can start this kind of mega cohort by standardizing and putting together methodologically the different cohorts. And when this actually happened, there are at least two studies which managed to put together all the different birth cohorts in Europe. One is CHICOS, which started the process, and the process was to really construct a mega cohort, so putting together all the different cohorts in Europe and make it possible to do federated analysis over the different cohorts was made possible by this other project, which is named Life Cycle. So this actually happened, but at that time, in Italy, in 2004, there was just a couple of cohorts, kind of very small in their sample size. So we said, okay, we should do also a birth cohort in Italy. And of course, the ideal birth cohort would have been done something like very easily described in this slide. So you take all pregnant women in Italy in a given year, for example, you enroll them, and the parents, the mother and the father, complete questionnaires at fixed points in time, and maybe also they undergo medical visits. Then the children are followed up periodically with questionnaire and medical visits, and they donate biological samples and environmental samples. You biobank everything, and the study is done. And maybe you enroll like 100,000 people, like they did in Denmark. I mean, this is the ideal birth cohort, but of course it's not possible to do something like this. At least it was not possible to do that in Italy at that time. So this is the actual context that we had in Italy at that time. I mean, it's most of the populations around the world, I would say. First of all, most of the pregnancies are followed up by private gynecologists. So that means involving thousands of private gynecologists over the country. I mean, that's not possible. It's not going to happen, not even in your city, actually. It's very difficult. The main aim is not to do research, and so it won't happen. Limited funding for the study. You don't have this huge amount of money. It's very difficult to get this amount of money. Especially at that time, it was very difficult to suggest to start a kind of research platform. Funding agencies were not interested in a research platform. They were interested in a hypothesis. So you do a study to answer that specific question. Now things have changed a bit. Now platforms are becoming more popular. But in 2004, the platforms were not popular at all. So you needed to start your study with your hypothesis. I want to answer this research question, and then you were doing the study. And then there are most of the hospitals and clinics in which women deliver see the pregnant women for the first time at delivery. So you can't really recruit them during pregnancy and then take a blood sample, a cord blood sample, for example, biological sample, because the people at the hospital will not know that this person actually participates in your study. So either you recruit the child at birth, but if you want to recruit the pregnant women, then it's very difficult to give the information to the hospital that they have also to take cord blood sample, for example. And then there are non-national research networks that cover the whole country. So basically, we couldn't do the ideal birth cohort. And then the question was, well, in 2004, we wondered, shall we use the internet to establish a birth cohort in Italy? Can we try another approach, which was to recruit over the internet, which was not tried yet in the population-based studies. And just for you to remember, these were the cell phones that we were using in 2004. So smartphones were not around, and I got the first smartphone actually in 2014, but I was a bit late in adopting the technology, and the proportion of people using the internet in Italy in 2004 was less than 50%. It is amazing actually how things change quickly. Well, 2004 is almost 20 years ago, actually, so not so quickly. But anyhow, we have here the change from 2000 to 2022. I'm sorry, this is difficult to see, but the white bar is 50% use of the internet in 2010, and nowadays in Italy is 95% of the population having access to the internet. So now everybody has access to the internet. In 2004, it was less than 50%. And we were wondering, how can we do a study in which we use the internet to recruit a birth cohort? And these were the options we were discussing. The first option was, well, let's recruit pregnant women using traditional approaches, but we use internet-based questionnaires. This was not very useful, actually, because it was difficult to approach the women and recruit them. So then the next option was, well, let's involve the gynecologists and we ask them just to collect the emails. It seems a bit old-fashioned now that I say, but we just collect the emails of the women, and then we ask them to send us all the emails, and then we will email them and ask whether they want to participate in the study. Then third option, let's do the same thing, but instead of going to the private gynecologist, let's try to identify some big hospitals in which there are, it's easier to collect all these emails and then send the invitation through the email. And then we could even have everything linked to a website. So the invitation of the email could actually provide a link to a website, and then we could go there and participate. And so the next development of this idea was, well, let's create a website and let's advertise the existence of a study, and people will, without getting all these emails, and people will actually go to the website, register and participate. So this is really the options that we explore, and as you can see, it's kind of a development of a way of thinking. And at the end, we decided to opt, of course, for the option 5. So we just created a website, and we started this web-based mother and child cohort, which is named Nymphea Birth Cohort. It was a general multi-purpose cohort, so it was a research infrastructure, actually. We started in July 2005. Initially, it was a pilot study in Turin, so we were advertising only in Turin. But then we tried to extend to the rest of the country and start advertising also outside Turin. We had also some active collaboration with the Tuscany region, actually, here in Florence, the Meyer Hospital. And then in 2016, we stopped the recruitment. So it lasted at the end 11 years. We didn't have any good reason, actually, to stop recruitment, but we couldn't make it anymore. Basically, you still need to advertise the study, so it is not, it doesn't come for free, the recruitment. You still have to invest a lot of energy. So the eligibility criteria are described here. So the pregnant women have to volunteer, know the Italian language, have access to the internet, and all get to know, and know about the study. This is the most difficult part. How can you spread the information around that there is this study? I mean, ideally, if you would have the collaboration of the Ministry of Health very strongly involved, you could say, well, let's recruit all pregnant women in just 1 week in Italy. That would be a very nice birth cohort. And then you say, if you can recruit half of them, that would be a super large birth cohort, just in 1 week using the internet. But of course, the real life is a bit more difficult, and now I will talk a bit about it. But this is just the diagram of the study. So at the end, we recruited about 7,000 pregnant women and children over these 11 years. We have a first baseline questionnaire, then a 6 months, 18 months, 4 years, 7 years, 10 years, 13 years, 16 years. Yeah.
One question. How do you manage to recruit just in Turin and then in Tuscany?
No, we were, the question is, how did you manage to focus your recruitment in Turin? Actually, we didn't want to focus in Turin, but we were advertising the existence of a study mainly to the Turin population, because we couldn't reach outside Turin, but I will get back to this in a second. So this was we also collected maternal and child saliva samples 6 months. So we sent the kits to collect the saliva, and people were self-collecting and sending us back the kits with the saliva in it. This is the website. So the idea is that you go here, you put your username and password, you log in, and then you start completing the questionnaire, you give the consent, etc. And of course, we have the news. So this is really our way of communicating with potential participants or those who have already registered. And so what is an internet-based cohort? Based on what I've just said. So we say, okay, now we are doing an internet-based cohort. What does it mean? It means that the members are internet users. Nowadays, it's almost everybody. Back in 2004, it was half of the population. They are recruited using the internet, and they are followed up using the internet or the other means. So the real important thing is that you recruit these people using the internet. That's like the core, the crucial point, characteristic of an internet-based cohort. So the participants should become aware of the existence of the study, and they should agree to participate by logging in. So they should log in the study, in the website, and that means that you should be very good in advertising the existence of the study. And I will get back to your question. So we use 2 methods. One is active, and another one is online recruitment. Active recruitment means that you go in selected areas, you find the places where the pregnant women go, and you try to use there like posters, leaflets, you speak with the doctors, you go to the pre-delivery classes. I used to go to the pre-delivery classes in the city of Turin, talking about the cohort, giving the leaflets to the pregnant women, and then waiting whether they were volunteering to participate or not. But there is also the online recruitment, which is theoretically much more efficient. So you just post information on the website somewhere. You can go to the radio and advertise your study. I was interviewed once in a radio program, and I will say, okay, this is the study, and it's important, it's interesting. If you want to participate, you can do this and that. We never reached the television, unfortunately. At least that would have been very, very important. And I will discuss a bit about how we did the recruitment, because basically, we didn't do it in a too professional way. So we were just inventing the online approaches to advertise the study, while there were already people more professional than us who were good in doing this, and we never involved them, actually, unfortunately. But then we were also using, for example, the Facebook. Which was, you might remember, the social network that was popular at that time.
Yeah,
Okay.
advertisements there on Facebook?
I will show you. I will answer to this question here. So one thing we did was to test a Facebook campaign. So we say, okay, we have Facebook, we can advertise the study there. So in 2011, we started this. We targeted women aged 18 to 45 years with an IP address in Italy. And they had pregnancy or delivery in the likes or interest listed in their profile. Very targeted too. And that was a cost per click approach, 200 euros invested. And what happened is that we recruited 8 people, which is not bad actually, because it means 25 euros per participant. So we understand what I want to show here is that participants don't come from free in an internet-based course. You still have to invest energy and money to try to recruit the people. It just costs less. And then has also other advantages. So we published these results, but the nice thing is that we did another campaign after this letter, and we got exactly the same result, 200 euros, 8 participants. It was kind of a constant, and when we didn't do any other additional campaign. So that at the end, we had this kind of, we call it a community, which are, because it's internet-based, who are the participants in the Ninfea birth course. They come from different areas of Italy, as you can see here, mainly from Turin and Tuscany, but then also from the main cities like Rome and Milano. There are quite a few participants, and also from other areas in Italy. We have been approached a couple of times by people who were interested to advertise, colleagues who were interested to advertise our study in their area, maybe because it was particularly polluted for some reason. For example, there was a colleague from Brindisi who started advertising the study there, and this is why we have a few participants from this area here. And this is the same thing through Google Analytics about the users of a website. More or less it's the same. So these are people accessing the website, and these are the actual participants. The two maps are very similar, as you can see. But then, let's say in 2010, so after a few years we started this, we were very happy about the study. As you know, we typically say, well, core studies don't need to be representatives of the population, but then we figure out that this was not really accepted by the scientific community. So we were getting criticism because of the study being internet-based. We were saying, well, this is a selected study. We say, yes, of course it's selected, but this is not very relevant. But then we were especially 3, let's say, groups of people. One, it was the ethical committee. We were saying, well, you are only recruiting internet-based people with access to the internet. And this is unfair for the people who do not have access to the internet, which is true. But it's unfair, but I think still not a big deal, because you can also do a study on other, I mean, luckily we have several studies going on typically in a population, and this was specifically on internet-based users. The famous British doctor study was only on British doctors, but I'm not sure whether Richard Dole got the comment from the ethical committee that these were only British doctors and not the rest of the population. Anyhow, I think there is a point there, but I don't think it's too relevant. Then peer reviewers, that was our main problem. So when we start sending the papers, the manuscripts to the journals, we got this comment from at least one reviewer: this is highly selected. I suggest rejection. On the basis of that point. And this happens a few times to us. Unfortunately, I don't have the copies. I mean, I probably have them, but I couldn't find the letters of rejection that we got based on the idea that it was internet-based. And then also discussing with colleagues, it came out that this was an important point. Basically because we have 2 levels of selection. The first one is that it is internet-based, and the second one is that people really have to volunteer to participate to this study. So it's highly selected. But we figured out that they had to actually produce research to demonstrate that the baseline selection was not that important. So that was quite interesting, actually. We started doing research on that. And we start some studies on baseline selection. Here you have 3 of them. First study, we did simulations to show that the potential bias was actually weak. Then we did another study comparing the nymphaea population with the general population. We just found that the baseline selection at the end was just changing the confounding pattern. I don't want to go too much into detail on this. I'm just telling you what we had to do in order to show that the study was actually valid and feasible. And we also worked on non-collapsibility effect. And then what was really actually important is what happened in 2000 for our study. What happened in 2013, because there was a paper published by Kenneth Rothman in the International Journal of Epidemiology with a very clear title: Why Representativeness Should Be Avoided. Very strong title. So we shouldn't do. He was saying, not only it is okay to do selected cohorts, but we should actually aim for selected cohorts. Very, very strong. Maybe even too strong, but very good. In our case, it was perfect, actually, title. And this came out after a conference that was organized in UK, which was actually discussing about internet-based studies. And then he gave a very strong a very good presentation on this issue, which then became this paper. And we were, I, Costanza, and Neil Pierce were invited to comment on this. And of course, we said, okay, representativism is usually not necessary and often should be avoided. And we were just giving a summary of our results. And there was a response from the editors of International Journal of Epidemiology, who were instead quite strongly in favor of being representative or trying to do representative cohorts. So this became a very interesting discussion, actually, which is still going on. My last slides on this is this paper, which we published in 2019, which I think is to me is kind of summarizing our way of reasoning. So the point is that interesting thing is that baseline selection occurs also in representative cohorts. So it's not really it's not an issue. It's something that is inherent with the fact that we are studying a population. And this is because populations are moving targets. So each population has its own specific characteristics and its own selection forces. So also a cohort study that is a representative of a given general population is not immune from the selection of baseline selection. It will be affected by the selection forces of that general population. And just to give you an very easy example of this, if we take 3 cities in my region, in Piedmont region, Torino, Moncalieri, and Cuneo, these are just 3 cities, and we look at the proportion of people who were born in the Piedmont region, living in those cities, it would be 50% in Torino, 60% in Moncalieri, and 74% in Cuneo. So people joined the population or left the population in a different ways depending on whether it is Torino, Moncalieri, and Cuneo. And of course, there are reasons why people moved to those cities or left those cities. So the population being in that city in that particular moment is a very selected population, which was naturally selected and decided to be present in that city at that time. So this is our current way of thinking about this. And so now I think the idea of doing internet-based cohorts is kind of more accepted after all these discussions. And there are also nice, interesting things, and this is the last topic I want to talk about, is that really the fact that you create this kind of internet-based community, let's say, means that you have opportunity to really engage the participant in the courts. And these are the, even if you don't see them at the medical visits. And these are all the different things that we do to try to engage the participants. And I will just show you a couple of them. First is that we don't have only the Facebook page, but we have also the YouTube channel, in which we put our videos. And this is the first video we put. It was me 11 years ago. And then we have Twitter account and Instagram account, and I don't know, we are debating about TikTok now, I don't know. But basically, all of this should be handled differently. I don't have any of these accounts, actually. I'm not in any social network, but of course there is a person who is able to do that, who is handling this and trying to communicate with participants and the rest of the world. So this is kind of important, I think. And the other activity that we started to engage the participants, in general the citizens as well, is to start showing over in our website, we started this data section. So if you go to our website, then you can see this data section in which we just make the descriptive statistics of a variable of our course available to the participants and to the citizens. So here you have all the different topics that you can open and look at the distributions in our court. Some of them are just, you know, some information which is just interesting to know, like what is the most common sport when you are age 13 years of, and so people can go there and see what is the most popular sport, which in males in Italy would be football, soccer, of course, but not in girls. So on average, swimming is the most popular sport in our court. But then you also have some health information. You have whether, for example, the proportion of children who used antibiotics in the last 12 months is something you can't see in the statistics. So this is actually useful also for the colleagues or decision makers, etc. And the participants know that their data are being used also for this kind of less complex analysis, but that can inform both the participants and the rest of the population. So my final remarks. First of all, the achievements. We found that it's feasible to recruit and follow up a large population base using the internet. So e-courts are possible. And then, of course, we did this to do live course epidemiology research. So we have all the publications, the projects, and we follow the advice by Anne-Marie and colleagues to try to participate in this European network of birth courts. These are the achievements. The future is to continue research, add questionnaires, etc., and also to try to go from the children to the adults, because the oldest child in the court will turn 18 years of age this September. So then we will have to do the transition from the mothers to the children, which become adults. So from the mothers to their children who are adults. So this is our main, let's say, activities. But I also want to mention something that I called missed opportunities, but it's not the right, actually, label. Anyhow, first of all, we could have had a better organized online recruitment. I already said this. And that is a pity that we didn't do it, actually, to try to be professional also on the way you advertise the existence of a court. And maybe we would have a much larger court, basically. The other thing is that we wanted to do a court of emigrants. Because if you use the internet, you can follow up emigrants. It means people who can go from Turin to the rest of the world. And to me, I know that there are a lot of some courts of immigrants, because you do a study in Rome and you recruit all the people who came to Rome, where you have just to make an example, your research infrastructure. But I don't know about studies of immigrants in which you start from the same population and then people were exposed to different environments. A study, I mean a birth cohort, a study in which you have active follow-up. So we asked for funding for that, but it didn't happen. It was turned down. So we don't have an immigrant cohort yet. And then we also try to do a network for e-course and say, okay, let's try to replicate the same design in different countries, and then we can have this mega e-cohort. We actually just did it in New Zealand, collaborating with colleagues there, but then again we had some projects to start the e-cohort in other places around the world, but actually this was not funded and didn't happen. So these are the missed opportunities, and maybe we will be able to do that, or maybe some of you will actually start one of those cohorts. So with that, this is my last slide. So I want to thank you. I didn't list here all the colleagues of the NIFEA course, because it's really a lot of people who is involved. But, and of course also the participants, but I actually want to mention this documentary that we did in 2020, which is kind of nice. You can find it in YouTube, in our birth cohort YouTube channel. And it describes the first 15 years of the cohort, and it's based on interviews with the people who worked in the cohort or is still working in the course. So basically the story is told by putting together all the different interviews. And it lasts 25 minutes, and it has also English subtitles. So if you want, you can look at it. And there you will find the list of the people who I want to acknowledge and thank for having contributed to the NIFEA birth cohort. Okay, thank you.